let's talk about the female reproductive system. It has two main jobs. The first one, of course, is to produce eggs so that they can be fertilized by sperm and we can have babies. The second part of that, though, is that it has to support and nourish the developing embryo and house the developing embryo until it's actually time to give birth. So it all starts with the development of the eggs, which of course occurs in the ovaries, and that would be structure A. Now, if it of course occurs, the sperm would have to enter the uterus. The uterus would be C, from the outside. And of course, that would occur through the vagina. And then it would enter the uterus through the neck of the uterus, which is called the cervix. Pardon my messy writing. Now, if everything goes according to plan, intercourse would happen around ovulation. Ovulation is the release of the egg. So once a cycle, one egg will be released from one of the ovaries. And once it is released, it will enter the oviduct, also known as the fallopian tube. Now it's drawn into the oviduct because of these finger-like projections on the end. These are called fimbriae. Not sure if that's how you spell it, but there you go. Now the fimbriae are undulating, moving back and forth. It draws a current which will draw the egg into the oviduct. Now, if fertilization occurs, it will actually happen in the fallopian tube, not in the uterus. But once fertilization happens, that zygote, that new living organism, is going to move down the oviduct until it gets to the uterus. And once it gets into the uterus, it's then going to look to implant in the inner lining of the uterus, which is called the endometrium. And this is a structure I'm going to be talking about quite a bit. So that embryo has to implant in the endometrium. Now the endometrium is pretty changeable. Throughout a regular menstrual cycle, it builds up with tissue and blood vessels, and then at the beginning of the next cycle, it will actually slough off and leave the body before it starts to build up again with tissue and blood vessels. So every cycle it repeats itself. Now let's take a look at what is exactly happening inside the ovary. This is oogenesis, or the making of eggs. This whole process actually begins before the female's even born, when she's just a fetus. Anyway, it all starts with special cells called oogonia. Oogonium would be the singular. These are the cells that actually make the eggs. Now, the next step is one oogonium will become a primary oocyte. And that's what females have when they are born. They have primary oocytes. And it pretty much stays that way until they hit puberty. And then at puberty, once a cycle, one primary oocyte per cycle is going to split. Now this is an unequal division. So most of the cytoplasm and organelles are going to go into what's called a secondary oocyte. The rest of the cytoplasm and organelles, but not much, is going to become what's called a polar body. The polar body really has no function. At the end of the day, it's just going to degenerate. Then afterwards, that secondary oocyte is going to divide again. Now this is also an unequal split. Most of the cytoplasm and organelles are going to go into the ovum. Ovum is a Latin word for egg, so that's what we're talking about. That is the egg. And another polar body. And of course, the first polar body might also divide. So what we end up with is 4 cells. But only one of them is actually a gamete. Only one of them is an egg. The others are polar bodies, and again, will just degenerate and are not really needed for anything. Now notice again that the egg that I have produced has 23 chromosomes, which, as you know, chromosomes are DNA, pieces of DNA. And if we look at the cells that we started with, which is typical of all the cells in your body, except for your eggs or sperm, they have 46 chromosomes. The point here is that I am producing egg cells that have half the number of chromosomes than what your regular cells have. The reason being, of course, that when that egg with 23 chromosomes is fertilized with a sperm, also having 23 chromosomes, the resulting cell, zygote, is going to have 46 chromosomes, which is the correct number for a human being. Now, just really quickly, I'm going to be using this term a lot, a follicle. And strictly speaking, a follicle and an ovum or an egg are not the same thing. Eggs develop inside follicles. Follicles basically are a cluster of cells that surround and help develop the egg. But they are two different things. So here's the egg inside one follicle. Again, this follicle consists of the egg and all of these other cells that surround it.